The rope hung from the oak tree like a noose-shaped promise. In the cold dark before dawn, more than 200 people gathered in the snow-covered square of Pinewood Summit, a thriving lumber town nestled high in the Colorado Rockies. Their breath formed white clouds in the frigid air. Their faces, lit by torches and lanterns, showed no mercy. They had come to see justice done. They had come to see Thomas Ashford hang. The accused man stood on the back of a wagon beneath that rope, his hands bound behind him, his face swollen and bloody from the beating he'd received when they dragged him from his cell. He was barely conscious, swaying slightly, his expensive suit torn and muddied.
Listen up, man. Trouble's coming. Stay sharp and follow my lead. I want rifles ready and eyes on the horizon.
The man who employed half
That's enough! Lower your
now
weapon!
Condemned by that very same
I
town
said
for
stand
the murder
down!
of a child. Sheriff Daniel Cross stood between the mob and the wagon, his rifle held across his chest, not aimed at anyone, but ready. He was a lean man in his 50s, with gray streaking his dark hair and deep lines carved around his eyes. He'd been sheriff of Pinewood Summit for 12 years, and in all that time, he'd never faced anything like this. "People of Pinewood," he called out, his voice steady despite the chaos threatening to erupt around him. "I'm asking you one more time to let the law handle this. Let me take Ashford to the territorial court in Denver. Let a judge and jury decide his fate." "We are the jury," someone shouted from the crowd. It was Marcus Brennan, the foreman at Ashford's mill, a big man with calloused hands and a reputation for fairness. "We all saw what he did. We all know what happened to little Emma." The name sent a wave of fresh anger through the crowd. Emma Hollister, just 8 years old, the daughter of one of the mill workers. 3 days ago, she'd been found dead in the creek that ran behind Ashford's mansion, her small body broken and lifeless, her dress torn. The doctor said she'd been struck in the head, then drowned. And Thomas Ashford had been seen with her that very afternoon, giving her candy, walking with her toward his house. "Nobody's disputing the evidence," Sheriff Cross said, though his voice carried less conviction than it should have. "But this is not how we do things. This is not justice. This is vengeance." "Then call it vengeance," shouted Sarah Brennan, Marcus's wife, tears streaming down her face. "That little girl played with my daughters. She was innocent. She was pure. And that monster took her life like it meant nothing." The crowd roared its agreement. Someone threw a rock that struck the sheriff's shoulder. He didn't flinch, but his deputy, a young man named Coleman, raised his pistol. The sheriff shook his head sharply, and Coleman lowered it again. On the wagon, Thomas Ashford finally lifted his head. His eyes, though bloodshot and half-closed, still held that arrogance that had always defined him. "I didn't kill her," he managed to say, his voice barely audible above the angry voices. "God is my witness, I didn't kill that child." "Liar!" The shout came from James Hollister himself, Emma's father, who pushed his way through the crowd. He was a broken man, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. He'd been one of Ashford's most loyal workers, had defended his employer against complaints about low wages and dangerous conditions. Now he stood there with murder in his heart. "You were the last person to see her alive. You took her to your house, and when they searched your property, they found her hair ribbon in your study." Her hair ribbon. This detail silenced even the sheriff. It was the piece of evidence that had turned suspicion into certainty. Emma's mother had tied that blue ribbon in her daughter's hair that morning. By evening, it was found in Thomas Ashford's private study, partially hidden beneath his desk. "I can explain that," Ashford said, but his words were drowned out by the mob's fury. "String him up," someone yelled, and others took up the cry. "String him up! String him up!" The crowd surged forward. Sheriff Cross fired his rifle into the air, the sharp crack momentarily stopping the advance. "I will shoot the first man who touches that rope," he said, and there was steel in his voice now. "I've known most of you since you were children. I've baptized your babies and buried your dead. Don't make me add your names to that list." For a long moment, the crowd hesitated. The sheriff was a respected man, a good man, and even in their rage, they didn't want to go through him to get to Ashford. But then Marcus Brennan stepped forward, and his voice was quiet but firm. "Daniel," he said, using the sheriff's first name, "we're not bad people.
The situation is critical.
But
I need your full cooperation right now. Do not deviate from my instructions."
The evidence is clear. And if we let him go to Denver, he'll use his money and his lawyers to walk free. You know how it works? Rich men don't hang, even when they're guilty. We can't let that happen. Not this time. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The sheriff felt his authority slipping away like water through his fingers. These weren't outlaws or troublemakers. These were farmers, loggers, shopkeepers, mothers and fathers. They were his neighbors, and they were right about one thing. In Denver, Thomas Ashford's wealth would likely save him, regardless of his guilt. But something nagged at the sheriff, something that had been bothering him since they'd arrested Ashford 2 days ago. It was too simple, too convenient. Thomas Ashford was an arrogant man, a sometimes cruel man, but he'd never shown any interest in children. He had no wife, no family. He kept to himself in that big house, focused only on his business.
For being here.
The
Your strength
idea
gives me
of him
hope.
luring a
Together
child
we'll
to death
rise above
seemed out of
this.
character. But the evidence was undeniable. Or was it? "Give me until sunrise," Sheriff Cross said suddenly. The words surprised even him, but once spoken, he committed to them. "The sun will be up in less than an hour. Give me that time to review the evidence one more time. If I can't find anything that changes the picture, then I'll step aside. I won't stop you." The crowd erupted in protest, but Marcus Brennan raised his hand for silence. He looked at the sheriff with something like pity in his eyes. "You're a good man, Daniel, but you're also a stubborn one. You can't accept that sometimes the answer is exactly what it appears to be. But fine, you have until sunrise. Not 1 minute longer." Sheriff Cross nodded and turned to Deputy Coleman. "Watch them. Don't let anyone near Ashford. I mean it, Billy. Shoot if you have to." Coleman nodded nervously, positioning himself beside the wagon as the sheriff strode quickly toward his office, his mind racing. An hour. He had 1 hour to find something that 2 days of investigation had missed, or to accept that Thomas Ashford was exactly what everyone believed him to be. The sheriff's office was cold and dark. He lit a lamp and pulled out the file on Emma Hollister's death. The doctor's report was straightforward: blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, followed by drowning. Time of death estimated between 4 and 6 in the afternoon 3 days ago. Thomas Ashford had been seen with Emma at approximately 3:30, giving her peppermint sticks and walking with her toward his property. No one had seen her alive after that. The sheriff read through the witness statements again. Mrs. Chun, who ran the general store, had seen Emma with Ashford. So had Paul Hendricks, the blacksmith. Both described the same scene: Ashford offering candy, Emma smiling and accepting, the two of them walking together up the hill toward the mansion. Then there was the ribbon. That damned blue ribbon, found by Marcus Brennan himself when he'd been part of the search party that combed through Ashford's house. It had been pushed partially under the desk, easy to miss but impossible to explain away once found. The sheriff closed his eyes, trying to picture it. Something was wrong with that image, but he couldn't quite grasp what it was. He opened his eyes and looked at the statement from Marcus Brennan again, reading it slowly. "I was searching Mr. Ashford's study when I noticed something blue beneath his desk. Upon closer inspection, I found it to be a hair ribbon matching the description of the one Emma Hollister had been wearing. I immediately showed it to the other searchers and to Sheriff Cross." The sheriff frowned. He remembered that moment. Marcus had called out, and everyone had rushed to see. The ribbon had been clutched in Marcus's big hand, its blue silk crumpled and dirty. At the time, it had seemed like the final piece of evidence, the smoking gun that confirmed everyone's suspicions. But now, reading it again, something occurred to the sheriff. Marcus Brennan had been the one to find it. Marcus Brennan, who had been at the forefront of calling for Ashford's hanging. Marcus Brennan, whose voice had turned the crowd from angry to murderous. The sheriff sat back in his chair, his heart beginning to pound. It was a terrible thought, an almost unthinkable thought. Marcus was a good man, a respected member of the community. He'd worked for Ashford for 15 years, had been foreman of the mill for the last 5. He had 3 daughters of his own. 3 daughters of his own. The sheriff stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. He grabbed the lamp and ran to the file cabinet where he kept old reports. He pulled out the drawer labeled with the previous year and began rifling through papers, looking for something he half remembered, something that had seemed insignificant at the time. There, A complaint filed 8 months ago by Marcus Brennan against Thomas Ashford. The sheriff had mediated the dispute himself. Marcus had accused Ashford of refusing to pay promised bonuses to the mill workers. Ashford had countered that the bonuses were conditional on
I won't hesitate!
That hadn't been. The sheriff had
disperse and face the consequences!
Determining that the contract Marcus had signed was clear about the conditions. Marcus had been furious. The sheriff remembered now. He'd left the office red-faced and shaking, muttering about how Ashford cheated his workers, how the rich always got away with everything. But Marcus was a professional, and when the sheriff had checked in a few weeks later, he'd been told everything was fine. The matter was settled. Except what if it wasn't? What if Marcus had been nursing that resentment, letting it fester? The sheriff thought about the timeline. Emma Hollister had been killed 3 days ago, but her father, James Hollister, worked directly under Marcus. Marcus would have known the family, known the child, known the schedule. The sheriff's hands were trembling now. He forced himself to think clearly, to consider this logically. If Marcus wanted to frame Ashford for murder, how would he have done it? The ribbon. It all came back to the ribbon. Emma's mother had tied it in her daughter's hair that morning. Everyone agreed on that.
Now.
But what if Emma had lost it earlier in the day?
This is our only chance.
And Marcus had found it. What if Marcus had been carrying it in his pocket, waiting for the right moment to plant it? But that would mean Marcus had killed Emma himself. And that was impossible, wasn't it? Marcus loved children. He had 3 daughters. He coached the town's children in woodcraft on Sundays. The sheriff felt sick. He looked at the clock on his wall. 20 minutes until sunrise. 20 minutes until he had promised to step aside and let the mob have Thomas Ashford. He grabbed his coat and ran from the office, not toward the town square where the mob waited, but toward Marcus Brennan's house on the eastern edge of town. It was a small but well-kept home, with smoke rising from the chimney even at this early hour. The sheriff pounded on the door. Sarah Brennan answered, her eyes red from crying. "Sheriff? Marcus isn't here. He's at the square with everyone else." "I know, Sarah. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth."
"I've reviewed the reports. The
Emma.
situation is worse
Sarah's
than we thought.
face crumpled.
We need to act
That
now
poor child.
before it escalates."
"What about her? Did Marcus know her well? Did she ever come to your house?" "Of course. Emma played with our girls all the time. She was here the day before she died. Actually, she and Rebecca were making flower crowns in the yard." Sarah paused, and something flickered in her eyes. "Why are you asking me this? What time did Emma leave that day?" "I don't know. Maybe 3 o'clock. Marcus came home early from the mill and gave all the girls peppermint sticks. They were so happy." Sarah's voice trailed off, and the color drained from her face. "Sheriff, what are you saying?" The sheriff's blood ran cold. "Marcus gave them peppermint sticks?" "Yes. He bought them from Mrs. Chen's store. He said, oh God. He said Mr. Ashford had given him money to buy treats for the workers' children. He said it was an apology for the bonus dispute." The pieces were falling into place now, each one more damning than the last. Marcus had given Emma peppermint sticks.
We need to move on
the
this
same
now.
candy that witnesses
Agreed.
had
What's the
seen
play?
Ashford.
We use the
giving
files.
later.
It's our only lead.
But what if those witnesses had been mistaken about the timing? What if they'd seen Marcus with Emma, not Ashford? From a distance, with similar builds and both wearing dark coats, it would have been an easy mistake. "Sarah, I need you to think very carefully. When Marcus gave the girls candy, did Emma lose her hair ribbon? Did Marcus pick it up?" Sarah was crying now, shaking her head in denial, but the sheriff could see the truth dawning in her eyes. She caught it on a fence post. It tore loose, and Marcus picked it up. He said he'd return it to her mother, but I never saw him do it. "Sheriff, no. Marcus wouldn't. He couldn't." But the sheriff was already running back toward the town square, his mind racing with horrible clarity. Marcus had the means, the opportunity, and the motive. He'd been carrying resentment toward Ashford for months. He'd had Emma's ribbon. He'd been seen with her around the same time Ashford had supposedly taken her. And he'd been the one to find the ribbon in Ashford's study, planting the evidence that would seal the wealthy man's fate. But why kill a child? That was the piece that didn't fit unless... The sheriff's steps slowed as a more terrible possibility occurred to him. What if Marcus hadn't meant to kill Emma at all? What if he'd only meant to take her to create a scandal, to accuse Ashford of kidnapping or assault? But something had gone wrong. Maybe Emma had screamed, tried to run. Maybe Marcus had panicked, struck out without thinking, and suddenly he'd had a dead child on his hands and no way to undo what he'd done. So he'd created a murder scene instead. He'd taken her body to the creek behind Ashford's property. He'd made it look like Ashford was responsible. And then he'd led the investigation, found the evidence, and whipped the town into a murderous frenzy. The sheriff burst into the town square, gasping for breath. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Minutes until sunrise.
I need to ask about this ribbon.
The crowd had
I don't know
grown
anything
larger,
about it.
more agitated.
It was found right
On
here.
the wagon,
So?
Thomas Ashford had collapsed, held upright only by Deputy Coleman. "Stop!" the sheriff shouted. "Stop! I know the truth." The crowd turned toward him, angry at the interruption. Marcus Brennan stepped forward, his face hard. "Your time is up, Daniel. The sun is rising. Step aside." "It was you," the sheriff said, his voice carrying across the square in the pre-dawn stillness. "You killed Emma Hollister. You planted the evidence. You've been lying to all of us." The gasps from the crowd were audible. Marcus's face went white, then red. "Have you lost your mind? Ashford killed that girl. Everyone knows it. Emma was at your house the day before she died. You gave her peppermint sticks, just like you gave your own daughters. She lost her ribbon on your fence, and you picked it up. You were the one seen walking with her that afternoon, not Ashford. The witnesses were mistaken, or they saw what you wanted them to see." "This is insane," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "You've been angry at Ashford for months, ever since the bonus dispute. You wanted revenge. Maybe you only meant to scare Emma, to create a scandal, but something went wrong. She died, and you had to cover it up, so you made it look like Ashford did it. You knew everyone would believe it because he's rich and arrogant and no one really likes him." The crowd was murmuring now, uncertain. James Hollister pushed forward, his face a mask of confusion and pain. "Is this true, Marcus? Did you kill my daughter?" "No." Marcus's denial was too loud, too desperate. "The sheriff is trying to save a guilty man. He's always protected the rich while the rest of us struggle." "Then explain the peppermint sticks," the sheriff said quietly. "Explain how you had Emma's ribbon before anyone knew she was missing. Explain why you were so eager to search Ashford's study, so eager to find evidence." Marcus Brennan's face crumbled. For just a moment, the sheriff saw the truth there. The guilt, the horror, the desperate rationalization of a man who had made a terrible mistake and compounded it with an even more terrible crime. Then Marcus turned and ran. He didn't get far. James Hollister, Emma's father, caught him before he'd gone 10 steps. They went down together in the snow, and when James pulled back his fist, the sheriff thought he would beat Marcus to death right there. But instead, James Hollister began to weep, great racking sobs that seemed to tear themselves from somewhere deep inside him. Deputy Coleman cut Thomas Ashford's bonds. The wealthy man fell from the wagon into the snow, too weak to stand. Several people moved to help him, including Paul Hendricks, the blacksmith who had testified against him. Marcus Brennan confessed everything within the hour. It was as the sheriff had suspected, an impulse born of anger and resentment that had spiraled into tragedy. He'd thought to hide Emma, to make it look like Ashford had taken her, to ruin the man's reputation. But Emma had been frightened, had threatened to scream, and Marcus had pushed her. She'd struck her head on a rock, and in his panic, Marcus had held her under the water to make sure she was dead, then created the crime scene to frame Ashford. The mob that had gathered to hang an innocent man dispersed in shame and horror. Some apologized to Thomas Ashford. Most simply went home, unable to face what they had almost done. Sheriff Cross stood in his office as the sun rose fully over Pinewood Summit, its light gleaming off the snow-covered mountains. He thought about how close they'd come to murdering an innocent man, about how easily truth could be buried beneath anger and certainty. Marcus Brennan sat in the cell that had held Ashford, awaiting the transport to Denver that the crowd had denied his intended victim. Justice, the sheriff reflected, was not the same as vengeance, no matter how righteous that vengeance felt. A mob with a rope and a grievance was not a jury. Evidence was not the same as truth. And sometimes the people you trusted most were the ones capable of the greatest betrayal. Thomas Ashford left Pinewood Summit 3 days later, selling his mill and his mansion and never returning. The town bore the weight of what it had almost done, a stain that would take years to fade. And Sheriff Daniel Cross kept his badge, but never again spoke of that morning without a tremor in his voice, remembering how close he'd come to stepping aside and letting darkness win. The rope was cut down from the oak tree, but its shadow remained, a reminder that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that truth, however inconvenient, however painful, is always worth pursuing, even unto the very last minute before sunrise.